The year is 1997. Buffy the Vampire Slayer has just premiered on TV, Tony Blair has just been elected Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and a young Jacob Habgood becomes lead programmer of a new upcoming Gremlins game. Hired back in 1996 as a front-end user interface programmer on a game project called Reloaded, this was to be Jacob's first lead role at the company. As mentioned in Bitmap Books' A Gremlin in the Works, Jacob discusses the pathways in life that eventually led to him working at Gremlin.
I wanted to be a psychologist right up until applying for university. I went away to a weekend where students go to have lectures in subjects and find a course. I came away thinking psychology was all a load of holics and I couldn't possibly study that. I really didn't know what to do, and it was my dad that said, why didn't I do computer science since I liked programming games? There was no thought of games, there was no notion of that. I just enjoyed working with computers, so why not do it? I went to visit the University of Nottingham and it was a lovely green campus. On a sunny day, it looked amazing. So, I fell in love with the city and wanted to go there. The fact that I was doing computer science was probably quite secondary. It wasn't until I got to my final year that it dawned on me that games companies were recruiting graduates. It was around that period that games companies changed from trying to find kids in their bedrooms to looking at university graduates. I remember researching companies and putting together a list. I did send greenies to Gremlin. I have a rejection letter from Pat Fellon saying they weren't looking to employ people at that time, but I was looking for them to publish the game. I don't know how I became aware, maybe it was a recruitment agency or an Amiga magazine maybe. I was interviewed by Tim Heaton. There was no C++ questions at the time. I was supposed to come back for a second interview with James Northern, but I came back and it was Tim again. We didn't talk about much, other than the fact of him offering me the job. I'd had 3 interviews. I had an interview with Gremlin, Codemasters and a company in London called Simmies that did flight simulations. That was my second round of interviews. I'd done a round earlier in the year and not got any of them, but I got offers from all of them.
1997 would be the year of Hogs of War's conception, with Jacob being handed the lead role.
It was a really long project. I'd never led a gaming project before. The promise of being made lead was passed on to me. It wouldn't happen these days, you wouldn't put someone that green in charge of a project. But you know, that was one of the great things about Gremlin, the opportunity was there. Among some of the young guys, we used to joke and call it the Gremlin University, partly because Gremlin went through a phase of employing a lot of graduates straight out of university. Students would cut their teeth on Gremlin games, and go and get a job somewhere else.
So how did the concept of a game about pigs shooting each other come about? Well, as the story goes, Ian Stewart had watched the 1995 film Babe. With the likes of Command & Conquer being #1 in the game charts at the time, Ian returned to the office one day and pitched the big idea of doing a pig-based Command & Conquer game. Lead designer Aid Carlos and creative manager Pat Fellon recall their side of the tale.
Well, it's half true. He just wanted a game with pigs in it.
It is true. There was an idea based around worms, and Ian said, why don't we do it with pigs? Oink oink. Hogs. Pig. Hogs. Hogs of War. Aid and I didn't want to do it, but we looked at the actual golf engine and thought it would be great to replace the golf balls with missiles and fire stuff out in 3D. Turn-based though. First person, turn-based games, who was doing that? It didn't make sense fusing genres left, right and center.
It's well known in the community today that Hogs of War was the very first turn-based shooter that worked in 3D, as it would take another 3 years before Team 17 brought out Worms 3D for the PS2. And Jacob reflects on this.
The bizarre thing was, apparently Team 17 had tried to make a 3D version of Worms several times and given up. That's what we were worried about, knowing that if they did a 3D version of Worms, we'd be stuffed. I remember reading an article about it at one stage. They said it was impossible to do a 3D version and I remember thinking, yes. We were quite cocky at the time. Once Team 17 got wind we were doing this game, they got quite pissed off that we'd taken their idea and got it working in 3D. I can remember looking at some of their postings on the internet, especially from their fans who were really annoyed that we'd done it. But we were quite cocky and young.
Now, despite what we know about the final product, Hogs of War's early development struggled to draft up a clear and coherent video game. As 1998 rolled around, the team were using the actual soccer character engine in tandem with motion capture data to help create the pig animations. It was a clunky endeavour, and as E3 1998 loomed over the project, Jacob and lead PC programmer Andrew Fox recalled the state of the game up until that point.
We did an E3 demo in 1998. My god, it was awful. It was slow, and the pigs looked freaky. Just weird and slightly scary. It was awful, there's no doubt it was awful. At that stage there was a big feeling that maybe it was wrong, and maybe we should can this. I was incredibly frustrated at the time, in that I felt that the milestones that worked would always be about technology. Get that feature in, get that working. It was never about gameplay, and that was my point. I said, hey look, we never tried to make the game fun. They felt there were two issues. The game wasn't fun, and the pigs looked ridiculous. So basically, let's can it.
The motion capture team transformed the sports work going on in Gremlin at the time. The pigs, however, definitely needed a different touch, and quality hand animation were the only sensible route. The biggest question was always, A, is it fun? We'd be playing and enjoying it in the team for a good chunk of time, but those external to the team needed convincing.
E3 1998 ran from May 28th to May 30th, and it wouldn't be until September of the same year that the team had to prepare yet another demo, this time for the European Computer Trade Show. Interestingly enough, the ECTS brochure for 1998 gives details on how different the product could have been. It states that Hogs of War is a skirmish action-based game loosely based around the time of World War I for PC and PlayStation. 6 armies are ready to battle each other, representing a different nation from Pigworld, and each with their own characteristics, strengths and weaknesses. The action takes place on a vast, highly detailed 3D landscape with around 40 separate maps. Players choose to take control of one of 6 armies, either taking on up to 3 friends or computer opponents in any combination, or indulging in one of the many single-player campaigns. Each army is clad in its own distinct livery, the inspiration for which and landscape is taken from bona fide World War I uniforms and settings, creating an edgy cartoon environment in which the conflict is staged. In single-player mode, the player battles through up to 40 missions with different degrees of difficulty and a variety of objectives. These range from relatively straightforward reconnaissance missions right through to requests to destroy bridges and fortifications, which require a little more daring do. In multiplayer mode, players choose a landscape from the specially designed deathmatch levels, taking out their frustrations on each other in a dark cartoon battle to the finish. The random level generator, capable of generating a minimum of 140,000 billion different levels, can also provide these arenas. The player will begin each mission with up to 10 pigs each, but reinforcements can be enlisted if losses prove excessive. Each pig performs a number of different duties depending on their rank and ability, ranging from mundane tasks like infantry patrols or digging trenches, through to bomb disposal and spying. The brochure then goes on to list some of the features that would be included, such as the release date being in the first quarter of 1999, that's pretty ambitious. The price, TBA, a unique look, cartoon realistic pigs from World War I, violent gore adds to appeal, that's interesting. Actua style pigs with heaps of captured animation, 40 single player missions as already been mentioned, versatile control methods add up to tactical in-depth play, explore each pig's skills to triumph, randomly generated multiplayer battle arenas, minimum of 140,000 billion different levels, vehicles and other instruments of war for pigs to use, and finally, particle effects use random fractal distributions for explosions, so players will never see the same effect twice. Regardless of it sounding good on paper, the actual game was far from what was potentially being promised. The project just wasn't up to scratch, so the development team went back to the drawing board, stripping back the entire game down to its most simplistic elements. One area of pre-production that hadn't really been normalized back in 1998 was the use of prototyping. Up until this point, Gremlin tended to go from the concept right into building that actual idea, but Hogs needed something more, as Jacob Habgood and Andrew Fox explain.
We had to do something drastic. So what we did was, and this made absolute sense, we made 2 prototypes. In one prototype you played a little cube, and we concentrated on game mechanics. Forgot about the technology, just landscapes, cubes shooting cubes at cubes. The second prototype was just pigs looking nice, so we worked on getting the face animated, changing the body shapes, adding more vertices so they didn't stretch in weird ways. What clinched it was the fact that the playable prototype was loads of fun. I wish I still had it.
The team knew we had something. It was 2 teams of Tron-like cubes gliding around on a neon and black grid, firing yellow cubes, causing domed explosions that used the physics engine to push the enemy cubes down slopes to their death in the lakes below. A lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun, and people could play that and say, yeah, because basically it was Worms in 3D. But we managed to make a fun game in about a month, when we'd spent a year making a piece of clunky technology. So we were able to prove the 2 things they were worried about. Yeah, combine that with that, and this game should work. So they were convinced then, and we carried on. But at that stage they said, yeah, but we need to get things out for this date.
So speaking of prototypes, here we have the actual official prototype document, which actually highlights 4 different prototypes that they were working on within the space of about a week. This is from the actual game design document for Hogs. And in fact, if you do decide to purchase a Gremlin in the Works, you will get this as a PDF. It is included. So in terms of the introduction, the prototyping process for Hogs of War was primarily instigated to establish whether the game would turn out to be fun and playable, with a secondary motive to explore if and how motion captured pigs could work in a game as the humorous characters they were intended to be. This took the form of 2 prototypes. The first on the PC would explore the gameplay issues, while the second on the PlayStation would concentrate on the characterization of the pigs. So we have the first prototype here, the standard Cubes of War, which we've already mentioned, from the 17th of November 1998. The game so far stripped down to its most basic features, using coloured cubes for pigs on a wireframe landscape. Cut down to 3 camera modes: map cam for cube selection, a fixed trail cam for movement, and a new movable camera for aiming. All of the user interface has been removed, and in doing so, any interaction with it, except for a much simplified version of the power gauge, the health of which cubes is now shown all of the time, which is what we have in today's game, above the cube concerned in the main view. So that's one of the big ones, I guess, which followed into the rest of the development and, like I said, into the final version of the game. Each cube has 2 reference vectors for aiming, and the red indicates the angle and the white showing the direction in which the cube is facing. We also have additional comments as well. Walking is redundant. Cubes should run all of the time. If you remember, this version, I guess, the 1998 early caveman prototype had a standard movement, so you would walk if you were just moving the directional stick forward, and I think if you held down triangle you would start sprinting. So you had the 2 different types of movement, but you can see here being defined that you should just be able to run at the same speed all the time to keep up the pace of the game. There should be 2 forms of trail cam: the existing near version with a shallow angle and a far version with a steep angle to give a better view of the battlefield when running around. A 3D scanner should be added to the bottom corner to show the relative position of other cubes, so some kind of 3D mini-map, which again is actually what we have today. The map cam should incorporate arrows to show which direction each cube is facing. Maybe it could also show a trail of the cube's movement during the turn 2, or something like the FOV indicator in Commandos. Being able to move more quickly definitely adds to the gameplay, however this means more obstructions are needed to prevent cubes running the full length of the map and taking each other out from a point blank range, which is actually a big problem in competitive Hogs that we have today, which is why we set the timer to 30 seconds. There's been a lot of debate in the community as to whether it should be 30 or 45, but we have 45 for Grunt League to give a little bit more time, and 30 to avoid that issue of being able to run across the entire map and basically be able to target anyone, because if competitive matches had 99 seconds, it would be incredibly unbalanced and unfair. In the prototype, we could represent each obstruction by different coloured squares, and in the final game it will mean more areas of water and or minefields. And finally, damage should be proportional to the distance from the impact point of the explosion, which is what we now see today as well with the likes of splash damage. Then we move on to 2 days later, to the 19th of November 1998, prototype 1.1. This one just has additions to it, and again just simple bullet points followed by comments again. An extra trail cam was added. Map mode buttons, which is numpad or delete I guess for the PC version, now switches between the close trail and the new more distant trail cam. The run button was made the walk button and run the default speed for movement, turning, sidestepping and aiming. That's interesting that there's a sidestepping option too, unless they mean just turning your pig around, because you know the whole tank controls thing was still a thing and is still today as well. Hold down 5 to halve the speed of any of those actions. The camera was stopped from following the rocket cube when it was launched, so that's a bit of a strange one. Lines showing the direction of facing were added to the map cam. Totals for the team health were added in game, so I imagine that's the little bit of UI or some kind of UI displaying both or multiple different teams' health as we see in multiplayer. A flat 3D scanner was added to the bottom left corner of the display, so the minimap was added in. The amount of damage caused by an explosion was altered to be proportional to the cube's distance, so splash damage had then been updated. A sudden death mode was added. After 10 turns, each cube's health drops by 1. There is actually a sudden death mode in multiplayer, but we barely ever talk about it because nobody uses it. I forget it's there half the time. The logic frame rate was locked to 25 frames per second, and the draw distance was extended. I suspect that was for the PC version because, let's be honest, the PlayStation version's draw distance is pretty gross. And additional comments for Prototype 1.1. Following the missile during its flight gave a better feel for how close the shot was to the target, and therefore made it easier to make aiming adjustments in successive shots. The camera should be made centered with the cube at the base of the screen rather than the center to give maximum field of view from the closest position, and the scanner makes navigation a lot easier. So some good news there for the minimap. Then we had Prototype 1.2 only a day later on the 20th of November 1998, so only 2 additional comments. The camera was adjusted to display the cube under the control at the base of the screen to make better use of the available screen area, and the single comment of this improves the view and makes the close trail cam much more functional. And finally, Prototype 2, we have flying pigs. More elements of gameplay are reintroduced. Each different type of weapon in the game is now represented. Indirect impact, so rocket. Indirect timed, so grenades. Indirect in general, so rifle. And static timed explosives, so like TNT or mines. Physics is activated on the cubes, allowing them to be moved as well as damaged by explosives. 2 impassable types of terrain are introduced. Water and minefields, the former killing any cube that lands in it, the latter sets off an explosion on that tile. The parachute drop skill, effectively a teleport skill, so the special ops is also added in case cubes should get stranded, so that's kind of a QA fix within itself in a way. Explosions themselves are represented graphically as expanding yellow cubes, and the camera that follows the ammo during flight have also undergone extensive tweaking. The ability to select which cube is used was removed, cubes now being controlled in strict rotation from turn to turn. An interesting note about that as well, the ability to select your pig, so pig selection was another option added into multiplayer that we have today, which again, no one ever really uses, but you can use, I think, L1 and R1 to flick between which pig you want to select, and it'll do it. But like I said, only in multiplayer. And the final comments here, the combination of a long turn time and fast movement allows the cube to move too far in a turn, so kind of the same problem as the earlier prototype. Movement should be more restricted, possibly by adjusting speed according to the gradient being climbed, because at this stage you could run at any speed on any tile. And by reducing the time allowed for a turn, the camera needs to follow the action when cubes are getting thrown around the map, which is a big must. And then we have the final comment at the bottom, approved week ending 18th of December 1998. However, because the prototype has been so instrumental in resolving the basic gameplay issues, it was decided that development should continue in a prototype state at least until all the fundamental dynamics of the game are finalized. After this prototype stage, the development of Hogs of War went from strength to strength. The gameplay was actually fun. It was no longer about trying to do something with technology and actually just focusing on the core gameplay, and everything around that just fell into place. The origins of Hogs of War are a bumpy one. If not for the dedication and drive of the dev team, the game may never have had the legs to make it through development. The game had a huge redemption arc, going from a hollow, technology-driven piece of software into something that was actually fun to play. Unpacking the entirety of what was going on behind the scenes at Gremlin is too much to discuss in a single video, so expect further bite-sized videos on such topics in future. If you do happen to be looking for something a little bit longer, then why not check out my full-length Hogs documentary, the link of which you'll find in the description. Also, if you haven't already, I definitely recommend checking out the book I've been referring to in today's video, A Gremlin in the Works by Bitmap Books. Not only does it fill in the gaps of Hogs of War's development, but it tells the entire story of Gremlin as a company, the people involved, and the games made. As I said, you can find the links to everything in the description below, but in the meantime, let me know your thoughts on everything in the comments. I want to know what you guys think, and I will catch you all later for the next one.